Hey everyone, I'm going to be making an account system using Node.js, but this is going to be a simple tutorial, and by that I mean there won't be an email verification system and there won't be two-factor authentication. All I will make is a register page and a login page and maybe a profile page to display some dynamic data. We are going to need Node.js installed, so go ahead and download that, install it. We're also going to be using MongoDB. For those of you who can't figure out how to download and install this, I left a video in the description which shows how to do so. Once you have both of those installed, we can create our project folder and name it My Website. Hopefully this isn't your first website because an account system is kind of a lot to jump into, even though this is going to be a fairly simple tutorial. If you are trying to make your first website, I'd recommend a video that I made. Yes, I'm plugging another video. Anyways, open up your project folder, open up the command prompt, then cd into your folder's directory. To get these out of the way, we're going to be installing the following packages: Express, Body Parser, Express Session, EGS, bcrypt, Mongoose, Connect Mongo, and then -- save so we can save it to our package.json. I'll somewhat explain these packages as we go through with the project. Let's open up our project inside of Visual Studio Code, or whatever IDE you prefer, and then create a new file, server.js. As you might figure from installing the Express package, I'll be using Express.js as our web application framework. I went to their page so I can head over to Getting Started, then Next Hello World, and copying this example code, then pasting that example code. It's not much to type out myself, but to be honest with you, I kinda do forget how to initiate it. Don't get me wrong, I know what I'm doing. You can trust me with this tutorial. It's just this part, the initiation. Anyways, just to show you that this is working, I will run node server.js, then head over to localhost port 3000. And then we see it sends out hello world, like programmed, res.send hello world. But I don't want to have to manually restart the project every time, so I'm going to install a package globally, nodemon. Run that command, then it should install globally. Once you have that package installed, you should be able to use the nodemon command instead of the node command. So nodemon server.js. Now every time we would update this code, the project would automatically restart as we see here, and if we refresh, like this video. Just to show you again, typing out whatever, Control S to save, refresh, you can see it updates. Now let's create a new file, name it signup.html. As you might figure, it's going to be our sign-up page. Now I'll be creating a simple login UI. I'm assuming that you already understand HTML and CSS already, so I'm not going to explain this part at all. Now let's program our server to actually send out that sign-up page. So app.get with the route of /signup. And then our second parameter being a function with the two parameters of request and result. Then res.send file at the local directory of being dir name plus /signup.html. And if we go to our signup route, we should see our HTML file is being received. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to be using jQuery to collect these inputs and then send an account creation request to our server. Going over to minified, copying that code it just gave us, and then pasting that inside of our signup page. I don't like that format, so I'm just gonna do it the way I like it. Now we can create a script. And I really hope you know JavaScript, because that is one of the basic technologies with web development. I don't expect you to know jQuery too much because all I'm going to be using it for is to collect these input values and then sending a post request to the server. But it would be great if you learned jQuery because it has helped me out so much. So let's do a little something with jQuery, which will execute once this document is fully loaded. Viewing this code, we can see that this function will execute once the document is ready. To target the form, we're going to want to give it an ID of anything you feel like. I'll just name it register. And then using jQuery, like in CSS, to target an ID, you would say #register. Looking at the submit method in the jQuery documentation, we can see that this is executed every single time the submit event is emitted for the form. So our jQuery selector for our form, .submit function. Pass in a parameter of e, so we can do e.prevent default. Usually what would happen when we submit a form is the page would refresh, and we don't really want that because then all the data is gone. I think this was for the PHP days, but I'm not really sure, to be honest. We can stop the page refresh with this code right here, e.prevent default, to prevent the page refresh. Let's create a variable, name it registration data, being an object. As we can see, we wanted to collect their username, password, and email, which would be done using these inputs. We can use jQuery to collect the inputs, but first these need to have an ID. Creating a username key, we can use jQuery to collect these input values. So like done with the form, money, parentheses, quotations, hashtag username, dot val. Val will just get the value of this input. And we do the same thing for password and email. Just to show that the collection is working, we will log registration data to the console. Create account. Then we see that the function is executed to log the data. Now we need to send this data over to our server, and we can do that using jQuery's post method, being money.post, and the first parameter has to be our API endpoint. We'll create that later. So a string /API/register. The second parameter should be our post data, which is an object. We've already compiled our post data right up here, so we can go ahead and pass that variable. And a third parameter can be a function, which basically tells us the response. So we can go ahead and console.log_res once we get a response. Like I've said, we didn't create this route, as we can see inside of our server.js. And if we were to submit the form, you will see that we get an error status of 404. 404 meaning the page doesn't exist. Let's go ahead and correct that issue by creating a route. This was a post request that we're doing. So instead of app.get, we would be doing app.post for that route of API/register. It's kind of silly how I'm using sign up and register, so I should actually change it from sign up to register. Same thing here. Now that looks a little bit more cleaned up. Again, our function with request and response. And just to show that this is working, I send out a plain text response of post received. Now we can submit the form again and see that we have a status code of 200. If we go over the headers and scroll down, we see our form data. And if we go to response, we see post received like we've programmed it to inside of our server. To actually handle this form data, we're going to be using a package called body parser that we've already installed. Scrolling down, we'll see some example code. I'll be copying this require, paste that near the top. I'll also be using this part right here as Express middleware. To do that, you would just type in app.use, paste that in. I'll be doing the same thing for body parser.json. Thanks to body parser, it's going to be so much easier to handle post data. As we've done on the front end, we post username, password, and email. To log that on the server console, we can just do console.log request.body.username. Same thing for password, same thing for email. Let's submit that data. Looking at the console, we see our username, password, and email. Of course, we're not looking to store to the console, that's just an example. What we'll be doing instead is saving it to our database for the event that we want to send in a login query and compare username and passwords. But to even think of doing that, we're going to need to connect to our database. That's where our Mongoose package comes in. So require our Mongoose package with const mongoose equals require. Then after our middleware, we can use mongoose.connect, the first parameter being a string. If you follow my MongoDB installation tutorial where I used all the defaults, your link would look something like this. The MongoDB URI. I have MongoDB installed on my computer, so localhost. On the default port of 27017. Finally, adding / your database name, so my website DB. We didn't actually create this database yet. I'll do that in a moment. First, I just wanted to create our second parameter, which is an object with a key of use new URL parser, and the value of true. If you don't use this, you're going to get some kind of deprecation warning in your console. Interesting, I see there's another option that we have to pass. I've never seen this before, so I'll just copy that, and then comma, paste it in. Okay, now everything's fine. If you followed my MongoDB installation tutorial, you should be able to just use the default settings to connect to your local database. The host name, localhost, and the port 27017. Click on connect, click on create database, then choose your database name. The first collection I'm going to add into it will be accounts. Navigating over to that database, then navigating to our accounts collection. The goal will be to fill this up with account documents. Because of the way Mongoose is designed, we're going to have to create models. From this example, we can see how to create a model. Basically, you would create a new schema and then pass in the data that you want your documents to look like. I'll just copy these here because I'm too lazy to type. Paste that somewhere up here. I'll be creating my account model with a variable and naming it account equals new schema, and an object underscore ID, and set that to object ID. We're also looking to store username, password, and email. So set username, which we would expect to be a string, set password, which would also be a string, and email, which would also be a string. Now to access it as a model, we'll create a new constant acc model equals mongoose.model account, and then our second parameter being our account schema. We can use the account model to insert an account document into our database. To do that, we'd create a new variable acc document equals new acc model. Next, you want to assign your key values. We wanted to assign username, password, and email, so we do that as if this were any other object. Account doc dot username equals request dot body dot username. Same thing for your password and email. We can get rid of these console.logs because we know it works already. Next, we can do accdoc.save, and then that will save it to the database. However, this is asynchronous, and we can correct that by wrapping it inside of a function. First off though, we should add the callback function, which accepts e being our error object, and if there is an error, we should throw that error. But because we're going to wrap this inside of a promise, we can actually do reject e, create our new promise. Put that inside the promise, and do resolve if there was no rejection. Finally, add await to make this synchronous, and add async so await will actually work. You can actually remove this line right here because an ID will already be set once a new document is saved. You would only want to set this if you wanted to make your own custom ID system. I'm just going to use object ID because, again, simple tutorial. Now if we create an account, we'll see that we got a response post received, so that would mean no error was raised. And then if we look inside our database and refresh, hooray, we see our document. We now have a working registration system. But if we were to create an account again, and again, and again, we will see multiple documents of the same thing. This account system will be username centric. So if multiple accounts are using the same username, this is going to mean collision issues. Each username should only be used once. What we can do to prevent this collision issue is have the database first check if someone's already using this username. If it's not used, let that account be created. If it is used, then reject. To search the database, we would just need to grab our account model with .find1, and then pass in our search query. Because this is username centric, we want to check if any document exists with the username of request.body.username. The second parameter would be a callback function with both the error and documents. Because this is a callback, that tells us that it's asynchronous, so we're also going to wrap this inside of a new promise, and then await to make this asynchronous. And if there's an error, we should reject with an error. Otherwise, resolve docs. This is actually find1, so only gets one document, so better naming convention would be to resolve doc and renaming this to doc. Because we're resolving a document, we can set this to variable found doc is equal to this whole promise, And if there is a found doc, we can tell the user that there's already an account with this username. Note that I put return here so the code wouldn't continue, thus saving the document anyways. As we know, we've already created accounts using this username, AWDA, AWDA. So if I were to create it again, we should get a response saying error, account already exists with this username. But if I choose something else, we should get the success message of post received. Anyways, there's another issue. We store our passwords as plain text, which is completely stupid. Please do not ever actually do this in production. What we should do instead is hash the password, and we'll be doing that with a package called bcrypt. We already installed the package, so we can just go ahead and require it in our server. We can get rid of this line since we're not using it in our model anymore. Now we can create a variable, name it hashedPass, set it equal to this right here. Replace my plain text password with the password that you receive. Set salt rounds to maybe 10. Finally, you got this callback function. Error being if there's an error, and hash being the actual hashed password. Because there's a callback function, we realize that this is going to be synchronous, which messes with our code flow. To solve that, we make it synchronous again by wrapping it inside of a promise. Like usual, if there's an error, we reject with error. Otherwise, resolve hash. Now you should update this with your hashed password. Now to show you what that looks like, we'll create an account. Refresh the database. And then look at this, it's a bunch of nonsense, even though we passed in this simple text off WAF. This just makes it safer in the sense that it's extremely difficult to read, and for one thing, this isn't a repeatable password. If their password really is off WAF, then this won't suffice as their password. They can't paste this in and then expect to log in. Let's do a little bit of code cleanup. So I'm going to actually move this at the top so we first search if there is an account before we start trying to do anything else. And then add a comment saying search if username is taken. Make password safe. Now I'm going to do a few tweaks to make response parsing a little bit easier to handle. So for one thing, I would do var result equals an object with a default success of false. I would also add a try catch, but wrap all of this inside of your try. Now here, instead of return res.send, we can actually do throw this string. Now, if type of E is equal to a string, then we would say result.reason equals E. Otherwise, say the result is a plain server error. And log that error to the console. Basically, if the error was a plain string, we can assume that the error is safe to report to the client. For one thing, this is safe because we did intend on telling users this specific error, but we wouldn't want to tell people there's been an error on line 57 for blah blah reason. And then after the catch, we can do res.json response. Because this code hasn't exited at all, we can assume that everything went through fine and say response.success equals true. Now that we've made it easier to handle responses, I added this code on the front end, and it will check if the response has the key success and if it's true. If it's true, then we can assume that the account was created and alert success. Otherwise, if success is not true, then there's probably been an error. At that point, we would check if there's a reason. If there's no reason, then we would alert res.reason, which may be error, account already exists with this username. If there is no reason, then we would just say there's an unknown error. This should actually be res.json result, because that's we're trying to pass in this object up here. We'll also need to set result.success equals true. So now if we try creating an account, we'll see an account already exists with this username through an alert, but if we do choose a unique name, it should say success.